My name is Mansur. My question is to Mohsen. Mohsen Bey, you will remember, I read the books of Necip Mahfuz. In 1989, he won the Nobel Prize. Necip Mahfuz, at the beginning of 1994, had a fatwa, death fatwa, that was issued by the Muslim Brotherhood against him, and he was injured. And now the very same organization, Muslim Brotherhood, is now in power with elections. So can people like Necip Mahfuz continue to live in Egypt in the future? Will they have a chance to live in Egypt?
This opinion about Najib Mahfouz before, but anyway, I think.
He was the winner of Nobel literature.
Yes, he knows Necip Mahfuz, but he's not aware of the fatwa, is what he's saying.
You're not aware of a fatwa issued by Ikhwan. Have you heard about it?
No.
Me too. I don't hear too. So Ömer Abdurrahman. Okay. Ben özetleyebilir miyim sorunuzu izniniz olursa?
Microphone, please. We cannot hear her. Microphone is yeah.
From this side of the world, maybe I should put it that way. We are seeing Muslim Brotherhood as no respect for human rights, for example, maybe for different views, much more liberal views. Maybe, can I put it that way? Okay, he thinks that he has a case for Necip Mahfuz as a similar case for Salman Rushdie, you know. And he is asking whether today, who now half of the parliament occupied with these guys, is it a better future for such different kind of perspectives in Egypt? Do you mean what to say?
Okay, I understood. Let me say to you that the parliament with this Islamic parliamentarians, I think, number one, it doesn't make an parliament duty very good. Number two, I think there are have very bad ideas for the political life. We saw this in Egypt. We saw this from their wording. We saw this from their situations. We saw this from their ideas. So I think the Islamic or the parliamentary Islamic, الحرية والعدالة and the Nur Salafi, I think there are didn't continue in the parliament. And we will make a new constitution, and the parliament will be will didn't continue with this big parties, الحرية والعدالة and Nur Salafi. All the most of Egyptians know that there are very not qualification for this parliament, Egyptian parliament, Shura and Shab Council, and there are very strong, they have not good idea for the political life, not good idea for the social life. So I think in the second revolution and in the second parliamentary elections, they didn't under the parliament. They didn't have this seats in the Egyptian parliament.
Ben haddim olmayarak sadece 2 tane anekdot anlatmak istiyorum.
Let me say two things about Egypt to inject some optimism. As you know, from our point of view, we see Salafi, the Nur Party, which seem to be on the more extreme side, and they have about 1/4 of the parliament now. And they are the ones who we know to have more radical views. But there was a discussion in the parliament recently, which I thought was very good. So half the parliament is Muslim Brotherhood, and 1/4 is Salafi Nur Party. One of the Salafi members of parliament started to call for prayers in the middle of the session. And the speaker of the parliament was from the Muslim Brothers. And he got angry with the member of parliament. And he said, if you're going to call for prayers, go to the mosque. And I think more importantly, he said, none of us is more Muslim than the other one in this parliament. So there is a discussion about what being a Muslim means. And another anecdote, the Salafis, as you know, are very conservative. If they were in power, for example, you would think that they would not allow aesthetic operations. One of the Salafi members of parliament, who was very vocal, was leaving a hospital with his face covered just recently, and he claimed that he was beaten because of his views, that he was beaten by the secularists. Of course, in these days, lies don't last very long. It turned out that he actually had undergone an aesthetic operation on his nose. He was expelled from his party, but I think these are the kinds of things that you have to remember and see that there is change. Any other questions?
Interesting intervention since this morning on a very important question. It is very clear that all countries in this area, the Middle East and North Africa, whether they have gone through the Arab Spring or not, are out for change and are convinced that there must be change, and that change must be democratization. I think the Arab Spring came as a result of uprisings by groups of people, spontaneously, without leadership, without organization, without institutions. That creates a problem. If you try to rush into elections, you are not liable to gain. Others will gain. This has proved so in Egypt and in Tunisia, because the other forces, the new forces, have not had the chance to organize. The question is, why do we rush into elections? Democratization is a slow process, and it must be preceded by preparation of the and leveling of the ground where the competition is going to be played. And I think there was a need for a transitional period, short as it may be, but enough to discuss all the outstanding, burning issues. I think Tunisia went this way in a sense, and though they went into elections, but also they had some time to write their constitution, trying to give themselves some time. I think there are certain issues which should be debated, discussed in depth, and consensus reached on most of them. One of them is the structure of governance in these countries. After periods of despotism, of presidential systems which became hereditary and became more despotic, corruption and misuse of government money, other things pertaining to the wealth of the country, how is it to be equally distributed, especially underground wealth or mining and other returns from the land use. This is creating problems. We have faced it in South Sudan and North Sudan about oil, and it's really going to happen in other countries about other material benefits. There are the questions of the minorities, as they say, but I'd rather look at it as question of an agreement on empowering all groups without any marginalization on ethnic or religious or tribal grounds. This leads us to decentralization. There must be an agreement on this decentralization. But agreement on decentralization must be the result of research and national will and political will. Because you have a challenge here. If you over-centralize, the country is most likely going to disintegrate. That happened in the Sudan, and we lost the Southern Sudan, and we have wars going on in other areas at the moment. If you under-centralize, you don't satisfy the legitimate aspirations of the people. So you have to strike a balance and reach a good degree of centralization that ensures the marginalized people are really participating in power, really part of the state, and that the unity of the state is maintained. You have to realize that the borders of all these states, or most of them, was written by the colonial powers over a century ago, and maintained by colonial power. But after independence, you needed in every country a new deal to achieve unity in diversity. You accept the religious diversity, you accept the ethnic diversity, you accept the tribal diversity, and see how you can include them in an all-inclusive policy instead of marginalizing them. Here, you face the threat of internal wars or separation if you fail, while if you integrate them in the correct manner, you will be able to build the nation, because we haven't so far succeeded in building the nation and having a common identity. I think these problems must be discussed. Therefore, if we want to write a constitution which addresses all these problems, we need time, we need full participation, it must be all-inclusive, free, transparent, and discussed in depth over a national debate in which everybody participates. And I think such a forum should look into this problem in its bigger perspective and advise how to go about it. The way you write a constitution, that is the constitutional process, is as important as the constitution's content. And you cannot reach a good content unless you have consensus during the debate, the free, national, transparent debate. Thank you.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. Başka soru var mı?
Thank you. Are there any questions? If not, I'll ask a question. Please do ask your question. Thank you. My questions to Ayhan, Bilgen. The interventions of all the speakers were important. I learned a lot, but I was waiting for the last sentence of Ayhan Bilgen's presentation. I'm very much interested in what he said in my research. So in some societies, people fight for the ballot box, and the ballot box is not necessarily sufficient. So what next? If only we knew what came next. I think maybe we have to agree on what would not be sufficient or what is not right. Because it's very difficult to agree on what should be. Maybe we can agree on what shouldn't be, because this is, after all, a process, and the previous comment was important in that sense. We have to consider technology, the level of organization in society, and we can see a different outcome in different societies depending on how that society is organized. And here values such as freedom, human dignity are important standards which we must ensure are common to all processes. But methods and instruments, I think, cannot be standardized. That would be self-defeating. So that's why we should not establish a benchmark, but I think we have to define that benchmark through radical processes. In the constitutional panels in Turkey, I always call the title of my speech, "How Not to Make a Democratic Constitution," because by talking and agreeing on what not to do, then perhaps we can move forward, because we don't necessarily always agree on what to do. Because there are examples around the world where you know what not to do. So those are the kinds of things that perhaps one should talk about. So what methods, what plots do not really take us towards real democracy? Perhaps these are the kinds of things that we have to talk about. And this is, I think, a status of being vigilant. And I say this because this has to do with how we view democracy. I spoke about Kurds mostly, and I was criticized to a certain extent. But the reason I focus on that is not just because of the that problem. There are some other very painful problems. If you look at women's representation in the Turkish parliament, we are behind the Iraqi parliament. So there are a number of other examples where which I can give you, where we have some bad examples. Let's take a look at the CHP. For example, there's a problem with representation of the Alawites, not even talking about the party in power, which is a conservative party, and the youth, same thing. So with the Kurdish problem, there is an organized opposition. And this is not just legal, there's also a military arm to it. And so democracy, if there is a problem of the sharing of sovereignty, and if it doesn't look as though those in power are not willing to give something, then we have to talk about others asking to take something away. And that's why we have to look at this. It's a question of making a demand and asking for something. And if you demand something, then you pay a price for it. And the Kurds have paid a price for it. It's not just the Kurds. Many have paid a price from their perspective. So this, therefore, is an issue we have to take into consideration. And if some of the problems are not resolved, then you cannot move on to the solution of others. So we have to somehow hold on to change. And that's why I asked this question about what next, or what can be done after the ballot box. I don't mean to reply that question, but I think that I believe it's very important that the ballot box is indeed that matters, and in our discussions here, and I don't mean to say that the ballot box and the discussion of the ballot box in itself is insufficient, because I know that there are countries represented here who are just now able to go to the ballot box. I don't mean to say that using arms is an alternative to the ballot box, or that kind of thing. I'm just trying to say that this may not be the only aspect of the discussion. We always talk about participation in government, we talk about civil society and continuous participation, not once every 4 years. This calls, this is important. And I think, therefore, that we should perhaps talk about some of these different aspects of democracy, because democracy is very abstract. We should try to attack it in different ways. Well, let me just put a few points forward, and then Choukri would like to respond to our guest from Sudan. When we speak about what, if not the ballot box, then I think there is a danger there in trying to answer this question. I think we're sort of focusing on thinking in old established structures. The current existing structures have not met the legitimate demands of people through representative democracy in the world. We know that, but we go back in trying to resolve this problem, we go back to some old formats. But I think that shouldn't be the way. I think we have to keep our options open. Now, Choukri, I want to give the floor to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to answer some questions Mr. has posed. About one side of the question was why we saw why the elections were so quick in all the transitions in the so-called Arab Spring. I think it's a very good question because it was a claim, a grievance shared by different groups, not only revolutionary groups, but also it was a way for a mean for the former elite of Tunisia, and I mean by that not only the former elite of the state party, but also the oppositional elite that we have in Tunisia, to be in the game a second time. And now to share the power, and the problem is not only the abstention rate that I remind it was about 45% of Tunisia that didn't participate to the election, 45%. The problem is that there were about 11,000 candidates all over Tunisia for 217 seats, but and also 120 parties, political parties that participate to the election, but the result of the election was about 10 parties. 10 parties won, and all the most part of the candidates have lost the election, and especially the independent lists, which were not from a party, and that represent generally mainly the inner regions of Tunisia. For the second part of the question, you raised a big issue about minorities. I remind here that Tunisia is a very specific Arabic and Islamic country in which we don't have ethnic minorities. I said that yesterday, and I know that it's a bit surprising, but we don't have ethnic minorities. But that does not mean that we don't need a new deal for social minorities to participate to power. This is the very real problem. We have social minorities which come from the inner regions, from Sidi Bouzid, from Gasserine, from Gbelli, from Jandouba, and when you go to Tunisia, you see not only, but very obviously, the difference between Tunis, Sousse, Sfax on the coast and the inner regions, but also about the social characters, or the social characters of the discriminations that these minorities, social minorities, cannot afford or can afford in real life, on daily life, are very important. So they historically didn't participate to the power, to political power, and we saw that first the revolution came from this region, and also the demand for a change, for a political change after the flight of Ben Ali came from this region. So I think that that's why the New Deal, of course, it's important, and it's important to include these minorities, but this will not exist or happen without social mobilization, because the current elite doesn't want to share power. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evet, şimdi etnik azınlıklar konusuna gelince.
Very homogeneous population. So the West has no lever to divide them. Okay? In Algeria, we have ethnic minorities. And the political contradictions are not managed by these divisions. We have a Berber minority. I am half Berber, half Arab. In fact, it's not ethnic, it's language minorities. Huh? We don't speak the same language, I speak both. But the contradiction is between so-called modernists and so-called Islamists. Among the leaders of the Islamist movement, there are Berbers. And among the modernists, there are Arabs, Arab-speaking. You can't divide them into two ethnic categories. Unfortunately, because the West would have certainly benefited from the experience of Yugoslavia, of Iraq, and of other places in the world now. This problem of ethnic minorities in Africa and in the Arab world is obviously an instrument of division. The main question for us is not our ethnic belonging, appartenance ethnique. It's, as Choukri said perfectly, our social minorities, the misery and starvation. What's happening in northern Mali now and in the Sahelian belt, regarding the Tuaregs, for instance, regarding all these Islamist jihadist movements, is clearly linked not to ethnic issues, but to misery and starvation, to abandonment. So the Western answer to our problem is merely to say you cannot live together, you are not able to form viable states. So the only way is to divide you. And this is clearly what the French have tried to do in Algeria for all the period of colonialism. They tried to divide us. Unfortunately, they could not. The main problem is in the Arab world now, it can appear as theological. We are divided between secularists, lay, and Islamists. But the real issue is not there. The real issue is in the lack of freedom, lack of liberties, and misery, and poverty. I am from Algeria. I've been to Tunisia and to Egypt recently. And what is striking for an economist is the cruel, difficult, unbearable social imbalances. It's not the difference between Christians and Muslims in Egypt, for instance. Misery is really clearly shared. And that's our problem. The Islamists throughout the world, in trying to answer your question, they react to this oppression, to the lack of morality. This is extremely important. The lack of ethics, the corruption of their leaders, the corruption of the Western educated elite. And you have a very clear sign of that, not in the Arab world, but in Western Africa, where there is in Nigeria now a movement called Boko Haram. Boko Haram, you heard about it. Boko Haram means, in the local tongue, the foreign education elite should be forbidden. It's quite amazing. Why do they want to forbid the people that come with foreign education? To the contrary, they need knowledge, they need science, they need education, educated people to rule their things, their business. In fact, since the independence, all the independence, this ruling elite, Western educated, has turned against the people. Has turned against the people. So there is a sound rejection of the West, which is regarded as being the main support, the main ally of corrupt ruling classes. When Naguib Mahfouz or Salman Rushdie criticize or insult the Islamic religion, I personally don't care at all. I am not concerned. It's not my... But for most of the people that in the Arab world, in Algeria, but in Egypt it's the same thing, and in Tunisia certainly it is the same thing. I'm sorry to speak on behalf of all these people that didn't elect me, but just to give you a view, the people feel insulted. They are under constant humiliation. They feel that the West despises them on a permanent basis. They despise their behavior, the fact that their women are veiled, that the fact that they have birds or no birds, or something. They despise their prophet. The scandal of the caricatures was very interesting. I live in France, in Paris, where the Muslims are really highly appreciated by the ruling political class, as you know. And when the scandal of caricature occurred, we, as Arab elite in exile, we were invited directly to denounce the fact that our masses, that our people in the Arab world, obscurantist, primitive, barbaric, stupid, illiterate, ignorance, we were invited to denounce these people. And when we rejected this offer, we were regarded as allies of obscurantism. There is obviously an instrumentalization of Islam, not by the Islamists, by the West, in order to divert the people from our region from the real problems. And the real problem is domination, misery, marginalization, exclusion. Thank you.
Galiba başka soru da yok.
I think there are no further questions, so we will invite a guest for our closing, Herta Deublard-Melian, the former Minister of Justice in Germany. He has both an academic past, studied economics, politics, and political sciences, and also served in the Bundestag for many years as an MP. And right now she is involved in Egypt, Tunisia, Sudan, Zimbabwe, Mongolia, China, and the whole Central Asian region in terms of creating constitutional and legal expertise. She serves as a consultant, as an expert, and would like to invite her to make the closing remarks for this meeting. Thank you.
This, of course, is not the case. but I feel very honored to be asked to make some, concluding remarks at the end of... Oh. But this was not the West.
Otherwise we cannot hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Everything's fine? Yeah? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Would you prefer to sit down there, sir? No? Okay, no, but let me start again. I feel very honored to be, let's say, a part of this most interesting conference and to make some, concluding remarks after a long day of very distinguished discussions. I must say, as a constitutional lawyer and, having been a politician for more than 30 years, hopefully not one of those bad models you have in mind if you talk about the West, because there are differences, we have to mention this. Yeah? And, looking around and taking part, let's say, in discussion processes of constitution making in quite different regions of the world, it's most interesting to listen to you and to see what's going on in Tunisia, where I've been for 3 or 4 times, last year, this year, and in February as well, in Egypt, in Zimbabwe, in Vietnam, or in China. You can see very interesting common points, but huge differences. And I think that's most important, just to make some statements. I think that we cannot speak from, let's say, the Arab uprising as such, or from, let's say, similar conditions in the respective countries. I think that the conditions and the socio-economic background in Turkey is absolutely different from that in Tunisia. People are different. In one there is an uprising, in other there is none. The civil society in both countries is most lively but totally different. And of course the problems are different ones. Here in Turkey there are lots of proposals, and one of the problems is the constitution, the military constitution. It's a big, stable, conservative party, and it's a totally different, let's say, geopolitical situation in which your country is than Tunisia is. But it's interesting that all countries, after uprisings and revolutions, they not only say we want freedom, we want the old personalities to go away, preferably into prison or into jail, and we want to stop, get the corruption stopped and all the injustice overcome. But they say, no, we additionally want to have a social contract, contrat social. I think this is remarkable, because this is, you cannot find this as a thing you can rely upon everywhere. Mostly people say, we want to have a better life, but they are not so much interested in the discussion on a constitution. And for me, it was most interesting being, let's say, in Tunisia and seeing that the contrat social, meaning a constitution, has a very special meaning. It is a very active and well-educated civil society, lots of young people. They have been, let's say, in the streets, and they say, no, we want political power to be defined by this social contract. We want to have that the constitution has a special meaning. That's the highest norm of the legality, and we want political power, social life, economic life, acting according to this constitution, meaning this contrat social nouveau. And this is a difference. If you go to Zimbabwe, you won't find this meaning of a constitution. There you will find very decent people in, let's say, the movement for democratic change, MDC, Mr. Tsvangirai. He's opposition, but he's in the government as well. And they are trying to get the civil society, which is there in this country. Wonderful people, well-educated people. And they are trying to have discussions, but as long as Mr. Mugabe and ZANU-PF is there, this is some sort of, let's say, a frustrating event because there is no outcome of this. They are, let's say, fixing a date, then the next date, then another date. So, but nothing comes out of this discussion. And if you go to Vietnam, you have a totally different situation as well. Mr. Geiger from the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung here in Istanbul, he has been in Hanoi for a long time. He will see that you have a fantastic academic community. And they are very much committed to changing the contrat social because they feel this must be changed because people want to be included. They want to participate in the political and economical process. And they are doing this. They are discussing wildly. And they are proposing this and that and that and this. But there is no chance at all that the leading party, which calls itself still the Communist Party of Vietnam, will give away only 1 iota of the power. So the situations are absolutely different. And I think it's really astonishing that you can find in Tunisia and in Egypt, and I feel that this might be the same situation in Algeria if there was a chance to do so, but you can see that under different, let's say, circumstances in Morocco as well, and in Jordan. We didn't mention Jordan today, but there you have it as well. You have a civil society that looks to Europe. They do it, not to France. And sometimes this is not a bad luck that they don't. But on the other hand, they feel more and more self-reliant. And this, I think, is one of the interesting outcomes of this uprising. That they say, no, it is us. We have some pride in our own forces. We want to have this social contract, this constitution coming out of us. And I was most interested in the explanations of the outcomes of the election. I was not so astonished on the outcomes of the election itself. If you look to Tunisia, you can find the strip at the coast. This is a developed strip, but all the hinterland is not. And so it is interesting if you add to that Ignada people and others, half of them were in prison, half of them had to go to exile. So they are reliable there. And of course, if you look back to my country and the history of our, let's say, republic at the beginning of the 50s, people that had not been so educated, not because they hadn't had the chance for that, they relied on that. People who say they had a religion were more reliable than others. Conservative society, they tend to say that people who say we are religious, that they are more decent than others and less corrupt. I'm not sure that this is right, and time will show. But I could understand this. It was, on the other hand, really an interesting outcome that nearly no one of those outstanding personalities who have been fighting in Tunisia against Ben Ali has been elected. Interesting, because they were too French, too European, yes, and not reliable enough. And if you look, let's say, to that, what the government does in Tunisia now, Ignada or Etakatol or the Congress for the Republic, there you can see they have to do all that what our friend from Sudan just said. And it's interesting that they are doing this. You see, everyone will tell you in Tunisia, I'm not so sure about Egypt in this way, but in Tunisia, everyone will tell you, be he or she conservative or the other one, we want to safeguard, to guarantee the acquis révolutionnaire. And there are some points and issues that are very clear on that. Freedom, better government, human rights, no corruption, even separation of powers, even an independent judiciary, but this is hard to achieve. Yeah, this is quite clear, and I think this is all on that. There is a consensus, but there are some important issues that have not had a consensus, and I think that the difference to Turkey is quite clear here. You see, the separation of state and religion is not clear, because I have seen the proposals of the, let's say, more conservative wing of Echnada about, let's say, Sharia prevailing. Well, going not exactly to the Iranian constitution, but more to the Afghanistan one, but this is bad enough. On the other hand, it's interesting that the consensus building on that has moved forward, which I find really fantastic, because I have read a press statement of Echnada at the end of March 26, I think it was, that they said they will not put Sharia prevailing into the constitution, which is good. Why is this so? I think it's because Eta Kartal said, no, we don't want that. The Congress said, no, we don't want that. And those three parties, they have united for a government and for a broad majority in the council, for the Constitutional Council, because they said, we don't have the time to discuss for more than 1 year. We have to find a consensus. So this is one of the points I found really impressive, that they are starting to concentrate on 4 or 5 interesting points. Second question is gender question. I think a consensus could be reached at least on the constitutional ground, but this depends, of course, very much of the status of civil society and the question of the, let's say, the article, the wording of the article, and this has not been decided. The inclusion and the rights of minority groups is the third one. It's not ethnical in Tunisia, but I think it's a question of, of principle, and that's why it might be a problem, hopefully not. Fourth point, which I find really interesting, and hopefully this is not too hard to solve in Tunisia, is the role of the security sector, including the military. It is not, I think, the question of, let's say, politics, parliamentarism, let's say, being stronger than the military sector. I think this is quite clear in Tunisia. But the question might be, what about those parts of the police, not so much of the military, but of the police, that has been deeply committed to Ben Ali? What about them? And what about the judiciary sector and those guys there? I had long discussions with them because they wanted to know what we have been doing with our old Nazis or with our old communists. But I only could say we were so bureaucratic. This was typical Teutonic. This is, I don't think, more than, let's say, a model in principle. And the last point is how to secure or how to safeguard the balance of power. And this is not only a question, let's say, whether you follow the French system. It's not decided whether they will follow that, which I would not prefer. But it's also the question whether you, let's say, create an institution to safeguard the constitution. So you could do that in a parliamentary institution, or what we have, a court constitution, a constitutional code for that. It's interesting because this has to be decided. But on the other hand, I think it's interesting how everyone looks to Turkey. They do not know about the conditions, but they see your wonderful civil society. And this is what they find really remarkable. And of course, they are looking to the economic strength. They are looking to, let's say, the power and the status of Turkey. And this is what they are like, what they like and what they want to be linked with. I think that Turkey could play a wonderful role. Even in the, let's say, discussion of the constitution, and I think that the model for Egypt or the model for, hopefully, Palestine could be even more valuable Perhaps for Yemen, I'm not sure that I know enough about this country, but I was informed that there might be interesting elements even for Yemen. But this only can be the case if Turkey and if the Turkish civil society, let's say, achieves to make their points clear and to implement what they want. I was told, and I found this rather interesting, that the political will of the parties, well, might be in doubt. I'm not sure whether this is right. But the civil society in Turkey is the decisive force. And coming back to that, I think that in this region, it's not only those points which I've mentioned and the time factor, because those young people, they want the dividend of their revolution and they want it now in their lifetime. But it's the question of civil society that is so important. If the Turkish civil society achieves, succeeds, is coming forward, then I think Turkey could be a model. And this is why I thank you very much for this conference. I only want to mention one point that Professor Abbas Wali has mentioned this morning. He said that the Iran constitution mirrors the political forces. That's true. I think this is not only the case in Iran, but everywhere. You see, as Germans, we have a rather long experience with democratic and non-democratic constitutions. I have to say that. We have not been at the beginning of democracy, not at all. We had awful times and awful backlashes, and we had to try again and again. But one of the social democratic founders of the Social Democratic Party in the 19th century, he was a constitutional lawyer as well, Ferdinand Lassalle. He said that constitutional questions depend on the power, on the state of the power. And that's true. But this is true in both sides of the coin. Not only does a constitution mirror the balance of power or unbalance of power, but although he who has the power decides upon constitutional questions. And we must be very aware of that. So I think that the influence of civil society in Turkey is a decisive factor, not only in this regard, not only in Turkey, but as well via the influence to the region. Let me give you one example at the end of that. I mentioned gender questions in Tunisia. I learned that a constitutional clause is not so much in danger, and the status of women, the law, is not in danger at all. But you could see that Salafist movements, they threatened women in universities and in schools. They threatened not only the teachers, women teachers, because they had no total, was heißt denn Schleier? Hijab. No, not only the hijab. No, not the headscarf. Yeah. But they also required that students with a total, not only headscarf, but with a total, should be able to follow, let's say, the courses at the university, which the university denied because they said you have to have eye contact out of pedagogical reasons. I find this very valid. On the other hand, the government leaves those, let's say, Salafists in peace. They use the new liberties and the freedom, and they harass people, and they cannot, let's say, they cannot do anything against that. This, of course, influences society. And if civil society does not say, no, stop with that, we don't want to have that, then, of course, the standard, even in the gender question, goes back. And this is one of the dangers one must see. You can see that in every one of the, let's say, processes or discussions of constitutional law in every country of the world. And so I only can say again, I hope that the civil society here in Turkey and all of you of civil society in your countries are taking the courage that these young people who have gone to the streets have shown to your own work and include that into the discussions of the constitution in all of your countries. I think that you are absolutely right. There have been made huge mistakes by a lot of people, West, France, others. I think the more one says where they could be helpful and should be helpful, the better it is. But it's up to you to, let's say, to say what has to be done and how it has to be done. Last sentence, thank you again. I think that time is running out. In Tunisia, you don't have more, let's say, than half a year to the longest 1 year, because otherwise people are getting uneasy and they will not see the outcome of the uprising in a favorable way, which I would really regret. So thank you again, not only to the NGO, the Helsinki Citizens Assembly here in Turkey, most important, but as well to the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. I hope to be back and see what wonderful things you have done. Thank you so much.
Sanırım biz de hepimiz adına I will thank you. So thank the audience for all of us, okay? So, bye-bye.